Thanks for staying with us now. It's looking increasingly likely that a summer holiday abroad this year is out of the question. Tomas Varadkar earlier this week suggesting that international travel could remain off the table for the rest of 2021. But despite the current level 5 restrictions, some people are still hopping on planes for non-essential reasons, with reports today that half of all airport passengers arriving into Ireland on one day this week were returning home from holidays abroad. So is there confusion around the rules for travel, and do they go far enough? Here's what Tomas Varadkar had to say when speaking on The Tonight Show.
Under level 5, it's very clear. Like under level 5, you're only allowed to go, you're only allowed to leave your home for certain things. And one of them is not a foreign holiday. So it's already against the law for people to do that. Yes, we appreciate that it has to be enforced, one for public health reasons, and one because it's really undermining the message for people who are staying at home, who are doing all the right things.
Now, joining me now to discuss this is Professor Tomas Ryan from the School of Biochemistry and Immunology at Trinity College at Dublin and editor of Air and Travel magazine, Eoghan Corry. Good morning to you both. Tomas, anytime you're in, we know what you've been very clear on this from the start, that we should try to get to zero COVID cases in this country. So do you feel then that the government are not going far enough with these travel restrictions?
I don't think they're going enough so far. I hope that's going to change. What we call zero COVID means getting back to normal. We want to get our freedom back. We want to get our liberty back to live the way we do. And in order to do that, we need to get the virus down, keep it down, and get it out. And we can't rely, unfortunately, on individual behaviour to do that. We need government to make that happen over a period of months so that we can have most of 2020 under complete normality in Ireland, except for, unfortunately, international travel. All of the virus that we have in Ireland originated from outside of the island, even if it's transmitted by other people in the country. And we had this conversation last year in summer. We put a lot of effort in, as a community, into crushing the curve. And then we had debates about whether international travel was going to be okay in summer. We had one of the most liberal travel policies in effect internationally. That's not true. It wasn't enforced. We had a fake paper policy, but in reality, in terms of enforcement, we had one of the most liberal policies in the world. And the fact is that from September, the country was full of Spanish variants of COVID-19 that were not here before the summer. So a very small number of international travellers seeded the country with new variants, and then they multiplied within the country. If we want to control this, we have to have lockdowns. But we want to stop lockdowns. We want this to be the last lockdown. And we're going to have a fourth lockdown if we don't control international travel. And the only way of doing that internationally is hotel quarantine.
Oh, and you were saying that's not true. What's not true?
The fact that we had the most liberal, we've one of the most strict policies on travel. The stats and the data all show that up. The only country that has less, where the decline of international travel has been higher within the Euro 40 zone, is the Soviet Republic of Georgia. Everything that Tomas has just said makes sense. Pull up the drawbridge, the plague stays away. It didn't work 1348, 1832, it still doesn't work. 200 countries in the world, the virus has landed in virtually all of them. If we had decided to make things, much stricter last summer and followed the sort of policies, and Tomas instances all the time New Zealand, there are 40 or 50 countries that have done this. For most of them, it's made the situation worse.
That's not true. That is
Peru
not true.
has one of the highest, it was one of the first to lock down, and it's one of the highest death rates in the world. So, we could play the parallel game of data, country against country. I mean, there are good instances within Europe.
If you don't give data, how can we know that you're telling the truth? What you're saying is just not true.
The ECDC figures are publicly available online, and you can check out the countries that, Czechia being a very good example, the only country in Europe that had a higher level of infection than ours. Take two Channel Islands, same policy, Guernsey and Jersey. Jersey out of control, Guernsey really under control. It's not that one way works, the other one doesn't. But what we have learned from previous epidemics, and Ebola has been a good example, is when you shut down the borders, and this is where the World Health Organization, Mike Ryan from Sligo, who knows a lot about viruses, said at the very beginning, keep the borders open, it makes things worse. Now, you manage, and the reason, Tomas is saying, let's get our own life back. And he said, he came out with his policy last summer and we listened to him. And the reality is that everybody examined it, the people who count, the medical people who count, NPHET, Tony Holohan and the cabinet they were advising, looked at that and said,
it's not going to work
it's
here.
not certain of work. It could work. We can't say for certain it can't work.
I mean, Tomas, we have to say that the government keeps saying that to try and get to zero is not possible in this country. We have an open border with Northern Ireland. Well, and even Tony Holohan has said it probably is not realistic. Now, the Taoiseach last night said it's not. Maybe it's something that we should be looking at again, because this time last year we didn't know that by now where we were going to be. Right. So is it a matter of we've all tried this? Now let's try this one. Now let's try your proposal.
I think the world has changed. The world has changed politically and scientifically. I think there's much more sympathy internationally for zero COVID type policies. I think we could eventually see one at a European level, maybe a two-island situation before that. And I think Ireland have the opportunity to lead on this, being an island. And the strategy...
But we're an island with an open border.
The motivation to manage the open border, which we haven't properly explored, will happen after we cross the Rubicon of international travel quarantine. We can manage the border, or we can negotiate for an all-island strategy. And we haven't seen enough of this. But the crucial point is this. The strategy so far has failed twice badly. Now, you're quite right that international travel quarantine on its own is no silver bullet if you don't manage community transmission. But it is an absolutely essential component. And the only countries in the world who have managed this pandemic to get back to normal life successfully, 100% of them have done international travel quarantine, and that's a fact. And the public are ahead of us in this one. The writing is on the wall. 90% of people want international travel quarantine, and over 50% of people want to ban all flights from countries that are defined as red by the ECDC. So it's going to have to happen.
Owen, can I ask you...
The reason it isn't is it would make matters worse.
Owen, you're part of the travel industry, so you want to see...
I'm a journalist covering the travel industry.
Yeah, well, you're a journalist in covering the travel industry. So you want to see some kind of... We want to see travel again, because, what is it? It was 75% of revenue for the tourist industry in Ireland is brought in by foreign people coming in, by international travel into this country.
OK, we're a very connected island. We were one of the most connected islands in the world last March. So let's take the 200,000 jobs in tourism, the aviation industry, all of that out of it. We are at something like subsistence level to keep ourselves running as an economy in terms of the number of flights. 21 flights out of Dublin today, it would be 300. If we're probably below subsistence level, because bits of the economy you don't expect stops working. People to service machines and power stations. All of those things stop working when you reach a certain level. And we may be at that level. And Tomas is right, the public is ahead of it. Tomas is part of an advisory group. Who are you advising? Are you advising NPHET? Are you advising the government? You're advising, it looks like you're advising the mob. It looks like Twitter has exploded to Tomas's very simple, we can get our lives back by following my policy, and that's what we're listening to.
Tomas, what are the government saying about your policy?
Well, the government haven't formally considered the policy that the Independent Scientific Advocacy Group is developing. It's been negated in press conferences or when they're doorstepped in the Oireachtas and so on. The Oireachtas COVID Committee, which is not the government, did consider it in summer, but they dismissed it as unnecessary when the hope was there wouldn't be a second wave. Since then, there's been a second wave and a third wave. There's no documentation anywhere to suggest that the government or NPHET have seriously considered an elimination strategy, and there's no evidence that they've seriously engaged with Northern Ireland on any kind of an all-island strategy. So both of those things need to change.
And Owen, what do you want to see happen? What would you like to see happen?
I'd like to see our numbers get back to something closer to the European average. We're about double the European average. NPHET say by February we could be down to about 300.
But then regarding travel, how do we open it without fearing an influx of the disease coming into the country again and going back to the numbers? How do we manage that?
We won't keep it out. We never did.
So we're living with it until the vaccine?
We do it at European level and we follow European guidelines. Remember, the grand total of imported cases, as we sit, is 9. not 90, not 900. That's the HSPC figures, Tomas. You can look
We
them
know
up.
the contact tracing has never been great. We don't know where cases are arising.
So is this? So
all we
are
have is
people
the
then?
data we're given. We
Yeah.
can't
No, the
just come on
data we're
and come
giving
out with-
includes known unknowns. We don't know where half the cases in Ireland are coming from. And we assume, however, it is a minority.
So then
coming
we need a better contract and tracing
Absolutely,
system. But then
absolutely.
should the airline industry be to blame for that? You know, because the airline industry is not to blame for our lack of
Travel
contract and
travel
tracing.
is the tap. We mop up the country with lockdowns,
It's
but then
already
travel
here,
is the
Tomas.
tap. We can get rid of it.
35,000 cases, 9 imported. Back to the aviation industry. The aviation industry is
Yeah,
good
but
at this. They flew through Ebola. They have the best contact tracing. And they're protecting their staff and their passengers.
What do you say to those 400 people who are coming in one day from holidays when we're all sitting at home and we're all sort of saying we can't even move past our 5K and there's people coming in off planes from Lanzarote or the Canaries or whatever?
It's minuscule. It's tiny. And each of them have had to arrive with a negative test.
Have they had a negative test?
You can't get in without.
And will they quarantine them for their 14 days?
No, the proposal is anyone arriving without a negative test will be quarantined. That isn't gone through yet. But remember, this is being policed, not at Dublin Airport, but when you check in. That's when they look. You're not getting on that flight. The airline industry has to protect its own staff. It has to protect its own cabin crew.
Can I ask you, Eoghan, and it was something that I heard yesterday, 400,000 people have had their holidays from last year moved into this year. That's a huge amount of people who are hoping to get away this year. What's going to happen?
We don't know. April was going to be the new January. It was going to be the decision time. That's been moved forward probably to July. We need a lot of look. We need to look on numbers. We need to look on their vaccine rollout and government policy.
But do we need government policy for them to get a refund? Does the government have to say, you can't go and then the insurance might pay up because you're not allowed to leave the country? Like, there's going to be an awful lot of people. Will they be able to defer again to next year?
If the flight goes ahead, they don't get a refund.
Get it.
And we had a big refund crisis last year, but there is much more flexibility in the booking ahead for the airlines this year. They're still protecting the summer, but there is a lot more flexibility.
Tomas, do you see those 400,000 people, should they just not even try to get out of the country this year?
I wouldn't recommend it. I think I've less interest in outbound tourism. I've more interest in domestic tourism in Ireland this summer.
Well, obviously we'd want to support it, but those 400,000 people have had their money paid. You know,
we're not going to be attracting international tourists this summer. We didn't last summer when our cases were really low, and right now we have the worst reputation in Europe because of our recent spike. People are not coming here this summer anyway. We have to support domestic tourism.
That they won't be coming here?
No, that there is an interest in coming.
In coming. That people will, when the numbers go down.
And it won't be government, it won't be airlines, it will be the consumer who feels safe to travel.
To travel to Ireland. Okay. We could continue this, but look at it all day, and we could continue it all day. And I'm sure it is something that is going to continue because I know, Eoghan, you were saying that, and can I just say, it was Leo Varadkar who said last night, let's not concentrate just on this and we think that this is solved because this is, and he was saying that, Eoghan, about the numbers are so low. He said it's all the other stuff that we should be doing as well, which you'd agree with.
We have to do all three things. We have to crush the curve,
misdirected outrage. And a lot of Irish people are abroad, locked down abroad. They choose to do that. It's not illegal. And a lot of what will be happening over the coming weeks in the airports is our own citizens returning.
Yeah. Okay, thank you both very much for joining us this morning.
Always a pleasure.